Chapter 1. Dahlia woke with a start. She was covered in sweat, and shivering profusely. The nightmares were coming every night now. She hadn't had a good night's sleep since it happened. In her dreams she always found herself back in that dark smoky cave. She remembered the candles on the floor, the sigils drawn into the ground, the sounds of voices chanting around her. How had she ended up in such a horrible situation? Deep down she knew it wasn't her fault. They had deceived her. Something moved in the corner of the small apartment. Ivy. She had been so caught up in her thoughts that she'd failed to notice the thorny tangle of thick green ivy and vines that had begun to cover the bedroom door and encircle the room. Taking a few deep breaths, she allowed the greenery to retract and disappear. They had come forward to protect her, unable to discern the dream from reality. Her fear and distress urging them to seal her in, keep her safe from the world outside. From them. Dahlia wrapped her arms around herself for comfort. She did not enjoy revisiting the past. A few more deep breaths and a cup of tea should do the trick. Sliding into her slippers, she shuffled into the kitchen of her small apartment and filled the electric kettle. Dahlia caught her reflection in a mirror above the sink and stopped. Her black hair clung to her face from sweat, and her green eyes were tired and bloodshot. She ran a hand through the dark locks. Her hair had been shorter when the incident happened, a pixie cut that landed just below the ears. Now, several years later, it had grown to a chin length bob with natural waves in it. The change was good. It made her feel like a different person. She wanted to be a different person than the one from the past. Checking the clock, she saw it was just past 3 p.m. The club she worked at pulled late hours, but the pay was pretty good and the other girls had welcomed her with open arms. Tonight was her night off, which meant pajamas all day, takeout for dinner, and movies all night. The phone rang and she saw Christina's name pop up. Christina was a coworker and one of her closest friends. "Hey girl," Dahlia answered cheerfully. "How's my favorite bacon-loving bad bitch?" Christina laughed on the other end. "You have got to stop bringing that up." Several weeks back, a group of girls from the club had decided to grab breakfast from a little 24-hour diner after work. Christina had been particularly wasted that evening and insisted the waiter bring her 2 full plates of bacon. The greasy meat didn't even stay down 10 minutes before getting thrown back up all over the table. Despite the gross event, Christina ordered it again the very next time they went out. That earned her the endless jokes about her love of bacon. Bacon jokes aside, what are you up to tonight? You're off, right? The enthusiasm in Christina's voice couldn't be missed. Dahlia could feel her relaxing evening slipping from her fingers. Yep, that's right. Perfect. Christina clapped her hands together on the other end. I heard some very cute guys talking about a club not too far from here. Dahlia could tell from her inflection that the club was going to be much farther than she wanted to drive. Someplace called Luna plus Lupin up in Mountain's End. Dahlia rolled her eyes. Christina was on an endless quest for boys. The idea of getting dressed up and driving 45 minutes out of town to see some middle-of-nowhere club did not sound appealing. Mountain's End? I don't know. I was just planning on laying low tonight. Christina scoffed. What are you, an old lady? Dahlia laughed. Some days it feels like I am. Christina was silent on the other end of the phone. She was waiting for Dahlia to give in. Affine. But you're buying. Yay. Christina chirped gleefully. I've got the early shift tonight, so you can either meet me at work and we'll ride together or catch a ride to Mountain's End yourself and wear something sexy. If the rest of the boys at Luna plus Lupin are anything like the ones I met at the club, we are going to be drowning in hunky dick. Christina. Dahlia giggled. Christina was so vulgar sometimes. I'm sure as hell not coming into work on my night off. With my luck, Rob will force me to clock in and give dances. I'll find my own way to the club. Probably true. That guy is such an asshole. I'll see you there. 10:30. Don't forget. I won't, Dahlia said. Looked like she was headed out for the night and into the unknown of Luna plus Lupin. Gideon Ulrich rubbed his temples as his sister, Arya, continued to rattle on and on. Gideon was the alpha of a large pack of lichens in Mountain's End. He spent his days in business dealings, meetings, and handling crises. Today, however, it was the birthday drama of his favorite and only younger sister. Even though Arya was a grown woman in her 20s, she would always be a little girl in his eyes. And this is an emergency, she finished and stared at him. Gideon sighed. Darren and Nova are on a mission. You know how important this could be. They asked us to only disturb them in the case of an emergency. This is an emergency. Arya threw her hands in the air. They are going to miss my birthday party. Just send Romani to get them tonight, then they can go right back to doing whatever they're doing tomorrow. Romani was a traveler who had recently joined their group. He had the ability to travel between our plane and the Veil, the shadow world in between. He also had the unusual and highly enviable ability to teleport. He had been a loyal ally when they needed him, and Gideon worked to ensure they did not take advantage or ask the newcomer to use his gifts too often. Your birthday party does not count as an emergency. You'll just have to celebrate with Nova when she gets back. Ugh. Arya turned and stormed out. Worst birthday party ever. She had a real flair for the dramatics. Gideon chuckled. The party hasn't even happened yet, he called after her. He returned to his work now that Arya's tantrum had ended, or at least left the room. Ulrich Industries owned a variety of unique businesses. Gideon had been fortunate to always hire reliable partners to run the majority of them. This allowed him to remain more or less a silent partner and to focus on his pack. One major benefit of having so many businesses and owning nearly everything in Mountain's End was he could guarantee work for his pack members and any of the shifters and humans who chose to call Mountain's End home. Being obscenely wealthy also allowed Gideon more freedoms than the average person. Despite the fact that he never needed to work another day in his life, he continued to show up each day and watch over the lichens under his care. To be honest, Gideon had never gotten used to the wealth. He inherited the title of Alpha, and a good chunk of his current fortune along with it when he was only a teenager. He had been lucky to have advisors and mentors who pushed him to diversify his funds and who taught him all about the business world. His parents always insisted he have a job growing up. He mowed lawns, bussed tables, cleaned out gutters. His parents knew the importance of working for what you wanted. They had wanted him to learn discipline and the skills to build a life for himself. Unfortunately, his parents passed away many years ago. Gideon knew they would always live on in him. He would carry on their traditions, and when he had children of his own, he would instill the same knowledge and lessons his parents had ingrained in him. When he had children, the thought made him drop the pen he'd been writing with. He always knew he would marry and have children one day, but the sudden feeling of longing and emptiness that hit him in the chest was surprising to say the least. It hadn't even been a year since he thought he may have found a partner in Nova. She was an ice-wielding celestial which the pack had saved from the collectors. The power-hungry and certifiably insane group had been hell-bent on using Nova and her powers to open the veil to allow them eternal life. Thankfully, the Ulrich pack had arrived in time to rescue Nova before too much of the veil had been released. Gideon had tried to form a bond with Nova. They went on several dates, but something had always felt off. The wolf within him had never been happy during their romantic dinners. Instead of eagerly awaiting her attention and affection, his animal would simply sulk. It turned out Nova's mate was Darren, a fellow Leakin and close friend of Gideon's. Darren was the head of security for the complex, and as fate would have it, Nova's one and only mate. Mates were rare and highly coveted. Gideon was happy for his friend and their mated bond. As soon as he'd heard the news, all the discontent of his wolf finally made sense. She never belonged to him. With a mate in the same building, Gideon never even had a chance. Technically, you don't have to be mates to fall in love and marry. Plenty of couples get together who aren't mates. But there is something truly unique about finding a fated mate, the one person you were destined to be with. Gideon's wolf let out a sigh. He was in his mid-30s now. While he was never at a loss for company when he desired it, he'd never found someone with whom he could form more than a physical connection. Women tended to throw themselves at Gideon the moment they learned of his alpha title or wealth. This made it especially hard to find a true, meaningful connection. The neediness and desperation to please always turned him off. He often settled for one-night stands on business trips out of town, where no one knew who he was, and he never had to deal with long-term conversation and questions. His wolf was even pickier than Gideon. The animal would occasionally go out of its way to interfere with Gideon's physical conquests. Actually, it had interfered with all of his recent attempts. Now it was Gideon's turn to sigh. He raked a hand through his brown, finely coiffed hair. When was the last time he had been with a woman? He couldn't remember. Maybe the gap in physical satisfaction was what was making his wolf long for a mate. Deep down, Gideon knew it was more than that. He was an alpha, a leader. It was his job to be a role model to the pack. He wanted a partner to share his life with and kids to carry on his legacy. He groaned in frustration and rocked back in his chair, completely unable to focus. Might as well take an early lunch. Instead of going to the cafeteria, he took his break in one of the training rooms. Sweating and blowing off steam would help to clear his head. Plus he still had time before Aria's party. The hours of training flew by. Working his muscles to exhaustion felt incredible. Once he and his animal were satisfied, he headed out. Stopping into one of the adjacent training rooms, Gideon spotted Aaron working with a group of new recruits. They had recently acquired a private security company, and Aaron had been working day and night to get the trainees ready for their upcoming missions. The lesson abruptly ended upon seeing Gideon. Alpha, we're honored to have your presence. Aaron was often a real cut-up and womanizer, but he knew how to be serious when he needed to be. Gideon had a gut feeling about Aaron. He hand-selected him to run the training program, and Aaron had consistently exceeded his expectations. Alpha intuition was rarely wrong. Gideon observed their drills for several minutes longer before nodding his approval. As he turned to leave, Aaron called out, "See you tonight." Aria's party was fast approaching. Gideon rubbed his temples, just thinking about what kind of over-the-top shenanigans his wild little sister had planned for the evening made his head ache. He momentarily thought about faking a big work emergency to get out of the birthday party altogether, though quickly dismissed the idea. Aria would have his hide if he missed it. He checked his watch and finished getting ready. His wolf perked up at the idea of going out. It scratched at him, curious. "Let's get this over with," Gideon said aloud. And with that he stepped out and toward the night's festivities. Chapter 2. Dahlia stood impatiently outside the entrance to Luna plus Lupin. Christina was late as usual. She leaned up against one of the club walls and pulled her phone out. Someone whistled as they walked past her. Christina had told her to dress hot, and oh baby she had. Dahlia wore a long black Catwoman-style bodysuit that laced up the front like a corset and ended in two thick adjustable leather straps. It showed off her generous chest in the most flattering way possible. She completed the outfit with her favorite pair of black thigh-high boots and a deep green faux fur jacket. She matched her eyeshadow and lipstick to the emerald coat. The outfit and makeup had the desired effect. Men had been stopping and coming up to her since she arrived. She politely brushed them off, explaining she was waiting for a friend. Dahlia sighed for the millionth time and checked her phone again. If that bitch didn't call in the next 5 minutes, she was leaving. There had been a shortage of rideshare drivers tonight, and the lift to the club had cost her a fortune. As if on cue, her phone lit up with Christina's name across the screen. Dahlia answered impatiently. "Girl, where the hell are you?" She heard a muffled voice on the other end. Damn, the music from inside the club was drowning out whatever Christina was trying to say. "Hold on a second, I can't hear you." She plugged her other ear and darted outside. She walked along the street until she found a narrow alley. Quickly ducking into the shadowy aisle, she walked to the end and put the phone back up to her ear. "Hey, can you hear me now?" "Yes, I can hear you," Christina said. "Good. Now where the hell are you?" Christina cleared her throat. "Sorry to do this to you, girl, but something came up." "What do you mean something came up?" Dahlia could hear something in the background, a male voice. She recognized that voice. "Let me guess, Zach's back in town, and y'all are going to work things out this time." This was a story she had heard plenty of times before. "Oh, come on, Dahlia, don't be like that," Christina whined on the other end. "It's going to be different this time." Dahlia rolled her eyes. "I'm sure it is." Christina cleared her throat again. "I'm really sorry I can't make it, but Luna plus Lupin is a really cool club. You should still go back inside and check things out." Dahlia laughed. "Yeah, right. That was not going to happen." "Yeah, okay. Good night, Christina." She hung up and stuffed the phone in her jacket pocket. What a flake. When was she going to learn her lesson? A gruff voice pulled her out of her thoughts. Hey, pretty little thing, you lost. Her head snapped up. A man now stood between Dahlia and her way out of the alley. She swallowed, nervous energy vibrating within her. No, I'm fine. Thank you. The man sneered. Yeah, you sure are fine. He looked her up and down. She pulled her jacket closed. Adrenaline was pumping through her as she crept away, attempting to sidestep the stranger. He blocked her path and smiled. What's your hurry? Pretty little thing like you don't got nowhere to rush off to. Dahlia felt a shiver run through her. The vines were begging to be released. They hovered just beneath the surface. No, not here. She begged her. Inner gifts. Darting to the opposite side of him, she attempted to run past the man. He grabbed the back of her jacket and slammed her against the brick wall. Get off me, she screamed. The man ignored her pleas and pressed nearer to her body. He was close enough. Now she could smell the stale beer on his breath. I'm warning you. She looked up at him. This is your last chance. Get off of me. The familiar rush ran through her and she could feel the green of her eyes beginning to shimmer. The man stopped moving, momentarily caught off guard. What the fuck? The vines writhed beneath the pavement. All she had to do was set them free. It was a risk to reveal her gifts in public, but she was cornered. The man gawked at her emerald eyes. What or why? His words were cut short when his body was pulled away from her and thrown across the alley. Dahlia looked around in confusion. She hadn't even gotten a chance to do anything. What happened? A feminine voice drew her out of her momentary haze. Hey dickface, she said to back the fuck off. A petite woman was standing in front of the fallen man. She wore a strapless blue dress and enormous stilettos. A light-up crown adorned her brown hair. It read, "Kiss me, it's my birthday." The man let out a string of curses and stood up. Stupid bitch. I'll get the both of you. Without warning, he lunged at the mysterious woman. Dahlia jumped to intervene. But the woman was lightning fast with her defense. A loud crack resounded through the dank alley, followed by a scream of pain. A moment later the man was back on the ground, clutching at his nose. Blood poured from his hands. Bitch, he roared. His voice had gone much higher in pitch. You broke my fucking nose. The woman planted her hands on her hips. You're lucky I didn't break your dick off too. Now get out of here before I change my mind. The man didn't need any more encouragement. He sprang to his feet and ran out of the alley. Dahlia stared at this tiny badass woman. Sapphire blue eyes met hers. You okay? Dahlia nodded. She was shaken but unharmed. Great, let's get out of here. The new woman interlocked an arm with Dahlia's, and the two began the walk back to Luna plus Lupin. I'm Arya, the girl said, her blue eyes sparkling. I'm Dahlia. How did you find me? The gorgeous woman let out an exasperated sigh. I was trying to make a call. But you can't hear shit in that club. Dahlia laughed. You are absolutely right. As they approached the entrance, Dahlia unlocked her arm from Arya's. Well, thank you for saving my ass back there. I really appreciate it. Arya frowned. You're not coming inside? My friend bailed, so I'm just going to call it a night and head back home. Excuse me. Arya started. You are not wasting that outfit, she pointed to Dahlia. Just because your friend bailed. Her eyes lit up even brighter. You can come to my party. Dahlia made an awkward face. Oh no, I wouldn't want to intrude. Arya gave her a grin. You wouldn't be intruding. You can be my guest of honor. It's my birthday. She pointed to the light-up crown. That means you have to do what I say. Smiling, Dahlia didn't know what to say. Arya tried a different tactic. Plus my best friend is on a work trip and couldn't make it back. You can be her replacement for the night. Come on. You'll love it. Just one drink. Dahlia sighed, sensing the persistence in the other woman. Maybe it would be fun. It was only one drink. Okay. She relented. Arya squealed with excitement. Yay. She grabbed Dahlia's hand and they dashed inside. The bouncers had immediately opened the doors upon Arya's approach. She must be a regular. Luna plus Lupin was a glittering scene of deep violets and velvet blacks. Lights flashed and girls danced in the various go-go cages. Arya led Dahlia past a row of velvet ropes and up to a curtained-off area. She stopped next to a table that was placed just outside the curtain. A tray of shots sat stacked, along with a sign that read 5 shots to enter or fuck off.
Xoksu Arya.
The petite woman picked up a glass and handed it to her. Time to pay the toll. Dahlia peered down at the liquid. I have to take 5 shots to enter?
Arya gibbled.
No. They have to take 5 shots. Since you're human, you can just take 2. Dahlia cocked her head. What a weird thing to say. She took the drink and downed it. The burn of the vodka spread warmth through her chest and throat. Arya took a shot as well. She handed Dahlia her second drink, which burned even better than the first. Arya proceeded to take 4 more shots. She let out a burp and shrugged her shoulders at Dahlia. Gotta follow my own rule. Dahlia just stared at her. Who was this gorgeous woman who could kick ass, break noses and handle 5 shots like a champ? Okay, the toll has been paid, you may now enter. She drew the curtain aside, and Dahlia walked tentatively in. They were in a private room with dark mood lighting. Several sofas and lounge chairs were scattered around the space. A round empty stage was set up in the center. There was also a table in the far corner with more alcohol, and an incredibly extravagant 6-tier birthday cake. The room housed a dozen or so people. Each of the guests seemed to be tall, well-dressed and suspiciously attractive. Maybe Arya was a model. Although she wasn't very tall like most models. These must be her model friends. The birthday princess is back. Arya shouted, and a small hiccup escaped her lips. A striking Native American woman in a smart black suit approached her.
Christ, Arya.
Have you been following the 5-shot rule every time you leave and come back?
Arya snorted.
Please, Leah, it takes a lot for me to get drunk. From the way she elongated the word, it sounded like Arya was quickly on her way to being hammered. The woman, apparently named Leah, frowned disapprovingly. A tall blonde man approached them next. Who do we have here? His voice had an unmistakable Australian accent. Another man, a curly-haired handsome brunette, joined the group as well. You bringing home strays again, Arya? His southern drawl made him even cuter, and he flashed a boyish grin at Dahlia. Arya locked arms with Dahlia. This is my new friend, Dahlia. We just met. She needed help and I hooped some guy's ass. Another hiccup escaped her mouth. The group turned toward Dahlia for confirmation. It's true. She broke his face and sent him packing. Leah wrinkled her nose. Arya, you didn't. Sure did.
Arya grinned.
He deserved it. Now celebratory shots all around. She and the boys filed over to the table to refill on drinks. Leah quickly followed, clearly trying to talk Arya out of drinking more. Dahlia was left standing alone. She looked around the room. A trio of 2 men and a caramel-skinned woman stood chatting on one end of the room. An attractive blonde couple sat cuddled up on one of the couches. The chair in the far corner housed a single large figure. He was staring down at his phone, typing vigorously. He must have felt her staring because he looked up. Dahlia took a sharp breath when their eyes met. He had the same blue eyes as Arya, only his seemed to burn with a luminescent glow within. Those brilliant eyes led down to a symmetrical nose, shapely lips, and a sharp, well-defined jawline. The kind of chiseled face reserved for photoshopped models. He was dressed in a sleek, well-tailored suit that wrapped tightly around his massive frame. Dahlia's heart beat faster and a dizzy feeling took hold of her. They remained staring at each other, neither person moving. A loud cheering snapped her out of her stupor. She looked over to the drink table where Arya and the cute curly-haired man were taking more shots.
Arya
waved in her direction. Dahlia, come here. She held some kind of pink mixed concoction in a test tube. Dahlia made her way over and stared warily at the glass. Relax. As mixed this time. Dahlia tossed it back. There was a sweet taste to it, but the strong burn she felt made her realize the splash of pink must have been for color and nothing more. It's a pink panty dropper. Aaron made them. She smiled at the brown-haired man who gave her another of his boyish grins. Have another, Arya slurred as she shoved a second test tube shot in Dahlia's direction. Dahlia shook her head. I've got to slow down. That's 3 shots in about 5 minutes. Arya slapped a hand to her forehead. Oh yeah, I keep forgetting you're human. Aaron sent a glare at Arya. The drunk birthday girl ignored his disapproving gaze and downed the shot herself. Alcohol swirled through Dahlia's veins and a warm buzz filled her. Arya hiccuped again. I thought the stripper was supposed to be here by now. Aaron shook his head. Sorry, darlin'. We tried to get you a stripper, really? Gideon vetoed it and you know I gotta do what he says.
Arya pouted.
Ugh, he is such a party pooper. A stripper is literally the only thing I asked for. She let out a whimper. Now I'll never get my birthday lap dance. Aaron put a hand on her shoulder. Oh, don't be sad, Arya. I'd give you one myself, but Gideon would cut my balls off. Pussy.
Arya sniffled.
Aaron just laughed. Sorry, I can't risk it. I can help. Dahlia heard herself speak up. Aaron and Arya turned to her with confusion in their eyes. Dahlia took a deep breath. She knew this was going to be unusual, but the vodka coasting through her veins had pushed any thoughts of consequences out of her mind. Go put a chair on the stage and sit in it. She pointed to the stage.
Arya
squealed again and ran off toward the center of the room. Aaron stared at Dahlia, an eyebrow raised. She ignored his look and down one final shot. She dashed quickly out of the room and toward the DJ booth. After slipping him a few bills and requesting something slinky, she slid back through the curtain. The rest of the guests had either taken seats or parked themselves against the walls of the private room. Dahlia approached the stage where Arya waited, squirming in her seat. She looked around as Dahlia re-entered the room. So who is going to give me the lap dance? The music changed and Dahlia took her place across the room. She looked into Arya's questioning eyes. Me. Arya was speechless for the first time since their paths had crossed. The slow, sensual music surrounded Dahlia. She let it envelop her fully. Sliding the furry green jacket off, she tossed it casually over a nearby couch. She took 2 slow steps toward Arya's chair, dragging the toes of her platform boots. Dahlia stopped mid-step and dropped to her knees, rolling her body several times before closing the remaining distance between them with a seductive crawl. She slid each knee forward in an exaggerated motion until she arrived at the base of Arya's chair. Dahlia wrapped her hands around both of the birthday girl's ankles. In a well-practiced move, tucked her head forward, flipping her body up and over her head so that her legs landed on either side of Arya's lap. Using core strength, she pulled her upper body forward until the two were face to face.
Arya giggled uncontrollably.
Oh my god, this is amazing. Dahlia cracked a smile. Arya was definitely not her usual audience. This giggly, enthusiastic, and respectful woman was a far cry from the grabby, greedy men at the club. Dahlia began to move her hips and Arya squealed with delight, clapping her hands excitedly. All eyes were plastered on Dahlia, she could feel them. One pair of eyes burned into her like twin flames. She dared herself a look into those cobalt blues as she peeked over her shoulder. He was gazing at her with such intensity it nearly made her stop. She didn't stop. Something in her relished the look, devouring the flames in his luminous blue eyes. She continued her routine, breaking eye contact and not looking over again for the remainder of the dance. Dahlia didn't need to look over to know he was watching. As the song faded, her routine came to an end. Planting a quick kiss on Arya's cheek, she whispered, "Happy birthday." Arya screamed, "Oh my god. Best birthday ever. You are a goddess. Where did you learn to dance like that? Can you teach me? Oh my gosh, please teach me. That was hot. I might be into girls now. Seriously, thank you." Dahlia laughed as she put her jacket back on. "You are more than welcome. Birthday girl. I still owe you for getting me out of that nasty situation before." "Damn darling." The boyishly handsome Aaron approached her. "That was smoking hot." His words were slightly slurred. Obviously the multiple shots he and Arya had downed earlier were finally taking effect. He stepped closer, leaning into her face. "How'd you like to go home with a real man tonight?" Dahlia's heart raced. A courage built up within her. "I'd love to." She turned away from Aaron, addressing the blue-eyed stranger still seated in his chair. "Do you want to get out of here?" His sapphire eyes widened momentarily and she knew she had caught him by
surprise.
Dahlia's liquid courage began to wane as he stared back silently. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "Let's go." Holy shit, his voice was so deep and smooth. The sound of it made heat rush through her. He finally stood up and Dahlia sucked in a breath. When he had been sitting in the chair, she had been unable to assess his true size. Now that he was on his feet, she realized just how massive of a frame he had. This gorgeous stranger had to be at least 6'7" and was incredibly well built. Dahlia swallowed hard, realizing she may be in a little over her head. She stuck her hand out.
I'm Dalia.
His massive hand connected with her skin, sending a zing of heat firing up through her arm. She shivered as her body seemed to overheat and freeze all at the same time. Gideon. Fuck, even his name was sexy. He placed a large warm hand on her lower back. After you. Dahlia swooned. That voice made her thighs clench. She turned and walked out of the party, but not before looking around the rest of the room. Every single person was standing there, mouths wide open, appearing somewhat in shock. She wondered which part of what had just taken place made them all so stunned and tongue-tied. Dahlia's curiosity about the handsome stranger continued to grow. Even Arya was silent. It seemed every few feet someone stopped to say hello or shake his hand. Geez, he must be some kind of VIP here. Dahlia made it outside a few paces before Gideon did. There were safe ride cars waiting out front. She started toward the first one when she noticed a vehicle from the back breaking away from the line and beelining it in her direction. She felt Gideon approach her as the car took its place in front of the curb. She assumed the car had acted so aggressively because it had seen Gideon and obviously wanted to be the one to pick him up. So he is some sort of VIP. And probably a great tipper too. Her handsome escort held the door open for her and she slid across the seat so that he could get in as well. Gideon gave an address and the car started moving. Just after they turned the corner, an unwelcome sensation filled the air.
Danger.
Her magic swirled within her, alerting her to something nearby. Dahlia began to shake. Gideon placed a hand over hers, concern marring his handsome features. What's wrong? She looked up at him, unable to speak. Pull over. Gideon spoke to the driver but never took his eyes off Dahlia. When the driver did not obey, Gideon tore his gaze away from her to confront the uncooperative man. I said pull over. A wave of heavy energy pressed in on Dahlia with the weight of his words. Still the car did not slow. Sorry, buddy. The driver's voice was low and eerie. You picked the wrong car. The man slipped a green mask over his face just as some sort of chemical cloud consumed the interior of the vehicle. Dahlia didn't even have time to process what happened before her world went completely black. Chapter 3. Romani sat in the complex's library, casually flipping through another book. The rest of the gang had all gone to Arya's birthday party. Sure, Romani had been invited, but he thought it was a bad idea. Several months ago Arya had gotten smashed at a packed dinner and attempted to sit on Romani's lap. Despite the fact that Romani had done absolutely nothing wrong, Gideon had looked furious. There were a few tense minutes when Romani truly thought Gideon's wolf may rip him to shreds, or that he would have to hide in the veil indefinitely. Her advances had calmed down since then, but he still didn't trust her not to make a scene. Arya was extra unpredictable ever since the attack of the collectors. She had been taken hostage by a mysterious lackey of Credence. In their attempt to take Nova, they had gotten their hands on Arya instead. While the Leakin claimed she couldn't remember anything, Romani felt there were still some things being hidden beneath the surface. One minute Arya was cold and distant. Then the next minute she was getting trashed and causing scenes. It was much safer to hide out in the library until the festivities were over. Romani was standing to grab another book to mindlessly read when the library doors flew open. The beautiful, red-headed Brona came charging in. Brona was a witch from a local coven and an ally to the pack. She, her brother Bjorn, and her grandmother Matlina had been crucial in locating Nova and defending the other pack members from the collectors and their attacks. They were also responsible for the protective wards that had been placed around the Ulrich complex. Brona and Romani hadn't spent much time together, but he knew a little bit about the witch and her powers. Apparently she had the sight, which meant she could see things and know things. Whatever other powers Brona possessed had been kept under wraps. Even though Romani was curious, he knew better than to ask. He had always feared being exploited for his abilities to teleport and travel to and from the Vale. That was why he had kept it a secret for so long. If Brona wanted to keep some of her abilities to herself, then he would respect her privacy. Brona was a striking woman. Her turquoise eyes shimmered brightly.
Romani
wondered why she hadn't gone to Arya's party. Why aren't you? Stop! Brona cried out to him.
Romani froze.
Gideon and his mate are in trouble and they need our help. Romani took a step back. Brona's words whipped around him and he struggled to make sense of their meaning. The last he checked, Gideon was single. In fact, he hadn't seen the alpha date anyone since moving into the complex. Gideon has a mate? Yeah. Brona nodded. And I think she's a celestial. Gideon felt like he'd been hit by a train. The good news was his leaken body was already burning through whatever drug they had sprayed him with. His head began to clear and he realized he was still sprawled out in the back seat of the car that had picked them up at the club. The club? His eyes flew open at the memory of the mysterious green-eyed woman from Luna. Plus Lupin. She lay beside him now, unconscious, her chest steadily rising and falling. A strand of raven hair had fallen across her face and he gently pushed it aside. Mine. His wolf made a loud declaration that startled Gideon out of the last of his drug-induced haze. Mine, it repeated. I heard you the first time, Gideon grumbled. Gideon sat there, momentarily stunned by the animal's claim. He honestly didn't know what had happened at the club. His wolf had perked up the moment Arya brought this new girl into the private party room. There was something magnetic about her. Emerald eyes and perfect plump lips were enough to get his heart racing. On top of having a gorgeous face, her curvy body had him practically sweating in his seat. Gideon had immediately recognized her as non-Leakin, though that hadn't deterred his animal. The damn thing had practically howled when she looked their way. Mine. Gideon's wolf was very powerful, but they usually worked in unison. Not this time. He had to use an abnormal amount of coercing to keep the animal from clawing its way out. The unfamiliar feeling of jealousy had pricked within him. As he watched the woman laugh and mingle with Aaron, things had taken a real turn when she started to dance. The way her body had rolled and snaked its way around the stage was nearly too much. The second she made eye contact with him, he had gotten so hard it was painful. A mix of sensations flooded his body, leaving him feeling like a prepubescent schoolboy. It took all his control not to pull her away from Arya and exert his dominance by tearing off her clothes and claiming her right there in front of his pack members. The fact that she had been ballsy enough to ask him to leave with her was also surprising. Humans tended to get anxious in his presence. The energy he exuded as an alpha often made them uncomfortable without knowing exactly why they felt that way. She had introduced herself as Dahlia. Dahlia couldn't have been much taller than Arya, making her more than a foot shorter than he was. Her small frame radiated confidence, something he found incredibly sexy. Dahlia. Now he had gotten her mixed up in something dangerous. The group must have been after him, and Dahlia had been his unfortunate companion at the time. His wolf growled unhappily within. The idea that they had endangered their mate set its teeth on edge. The sound of several men arguing outside the car tore Gideon's attention away from Dahlia. The boss sent you to pick up one person. One. How could you have fucked this up? What was I supposed to do? The other one got in the car too and I didn't have a choice. Gideon stole a glance out the window, careful not to draw attention to the fact that he was awake. Two men were arguing while four others stood near a large white van, seemingly unsure what to do next. One of the men had an ugly scar that went down the left side of his jaw and took part of his earlobe with. The other man had wide-set eyes that seemed bulbous and too big for his skull. The ground beneath them was composed of loose gravel and dirt. They must have taken the back roads deep into the woods. Scardier frowned. We've got to get rid of him. The bulging-eyed man's eyes went even wider. Who is he? Who cares? He only wanted the girl. Do you want to get paid? The man swallowed and nodded. Gideon's heart lurched. They were after Dahlia. His wolf roared in anger. How dare they come near his mate? The men didn't seem to recognize him, which explained why they hadn't properly dosed him. They had been anticipating a petite human woman, not a 6'7" man with a Leakin's metabolism. Gideon quickly shut his eyes as the men approached the car. They opened the door and began unceremoniously dragging his large frame out of the back seat. The men let out loud grunts as they struggled to pull him free. This guy is fucking huge. Hurry up. Gideon remained still. He hoped to learn more about why they wanted Dahlia. The sound of a gun cocking signaled that he was out of time. Information would have to wait. His and Dahlia's survival was the priority now. He launched up from the ground, knocking the gun free from the grasp of bulging eyes. With Leakin strength he hooked an arm around the man's neck. flipping his body up and over. There was an array of crunching and cracking sounds as he slammed the man down on top of the second assailant. Their bodies crashed together with such force that the two men fused into a pile of jutting bones and bloody, pulpy meat. The rest of the men were in action now. Scardier managed to get a shot off. In the moments following his initial surprise, the bullet tore through Gideon's shoulder. He didn't even slow down. The alpha rushed forward with a feral ferocity. He ripped the gun-wielding arm free from its socket. The man screamed as his lifeless arm dropped to the ground. Gideon jerked hard on the man's face, twisting his neck around fully. The screaming abruptly stopped. The remaining 3 men had scattered to find cover. The survivors either hadn't been armed, or were perhaps too afraid to use their weapons. "Don't move," a shaky voice shouted. Gideon turned toward the car to find one of the men holding an unconscious Dahlia. A gun was pressed firmly to the back of the helpless woman's skull. The man wailed in terror. "What the fuck are you?" Gideon took a step closer. "If you come near me, I'll blow her brains out." The man reeked of fear. It rolled off of him in waves. Gideon's wolf relished the scent of it. A shimmering nearby caught his attention. A pair of figures appeared just to the left of where the armed man stood. The man looked over in shock. "What the fuck?" Gideon's wolf seized the momentary distraction as it ripped free from his skin. The last thing the gunman saw was an enormous brown wolf sailing toward him before the animal's jaws latched onto his face, ending his life. Gideon's wolf buried its muzzle in the man's flesh, savoring the taste of his blood. Looked up as the 2 figures approached. It was Brona and Romani. His wolf stared at them wary. It only took a moment to realize the red-headed which must have seen something with her power of sight, and alerted Romani to bring her here. The wolf looked to where Dahlia lay crumpled on the ground. She appeared to be stable but still unconscious. Gideon's wolf turned to Romani, then to Dahlia and back again. "We'll get her somewhere safe." It was Brona who spoke. Gideon's wolf nodded. Before turning to locate the last 2 fleeing assailants, track them down with thrilling precision. The taste of their blood fueled his wolf's desire for revenge on those who would dare harm the woman in their care. The first man had tried to fight back. It was a truly fruitless struggle. The last man had simply cowered, eyes wide with fear, as Gideon's crimson-stained wolf stalked toward him. When Gideon returned to the location of the initial attack, Brona and Dahlia were gone. Romani had returned and stood with Leah and Lance by his side. "Ulrich." Leah moved quickly toward Gideon as he began to shift back to human form. Lance was only a step behind her. The beta's toffee eyes glowed. "What happened? Are you injured?" Gideon shook his head. He rolled his shoulder, assessing the gunshot wound. Fortunately, the wound had already healed. Unfortunately, he could tell the bullet was still lodged inside. Dr. Sawyer would have to reopen the wound and dig the metal out when they returned to the complex. "Is she safe?" Gideon asked Romani, without answering Lance's question. "Yes, Brona is taking care of her." "Thank you." Leah looked between the 2 men and then at the carnage strewn around them. "Someone please tell me what's going on. Does this have to do with the woman from the club? Did she attack you?" Leah's fierce black eyes glowed. Gideon raised a hand to calm her and winced. The fight-induced boost of adrenaline was fading quickly, and the lodged bullet was now digging painfully into the meat of his muscles. Leah frowned. "You are injured. Let me see." She gently felt around his shoulder, pressing her fingers deeper into the skin, until Gideon let out an unhappy growl. He swatted her hand away. "It's just a bullet. You just met this girl, and you're already taking bullets for her?" She raised an eyebrow. "Anything else you care to tell us?" Gideon evaded the question. "Let's get back to the complex and I'll brief you on everything." "Yes, Ulrich," the pair answered in unison. The 3 lichens moved in closer to Romani. A moment later the familiar shimmer appeared, and the horrific crime scene around them faded away. Chapter 4. Dahlia's eyes opened slowly. She let out an uncomfortable groan as the bright lights filled her sight. Her head was pounding, each pulse like a jackhammer, sending pain radiating from the top of her skull down the length of her spine. What the hell happened? Fighting the fog in her brain, she worked to think back on the events of the past few hours. The club, the birthday girl, the dance, the man. Gideon. Her eyes snapped wide open. She sat upright. The jerky movement made her head swim. She pressed a hand to her face and closed her eyes again. Oh, you're up. A melodic female voice spoke from somewhere else in the room. Dahlia opened her eyes again and this time saw a figure striding across the vast space. An unusually beautiful woman with her fiery red hair and vibrant turquoise eyes. Dahlia looked at her with confusion. Where am I? The lovely woman sat next to her. You're safe in the Ulrich complex. Dahlia took in her surroundings. It looked like she was in some kind of lavish penthouse. She was sitting on a lush gray couch that faced a wall of impressive windows. To her left was a tall entryway with a modern arch that housed the statue of a large marble wolf. Her head spun. Did you drug me? The redhead gasped in horror. Oh God, no. We saved you from those men who tried to kidnap you. Well, technically Gideon saved you. Romani and I just showed up in time to bring you back here. Gideon. Dahlia's heart raced as she remembered those brilliant blue eyes. Where is he? Is he all right? Oh, he's fine. The woman waved a hand. He doesn't get injured easily.
Romani.
Got you and me out, but Gideon stayed behind too. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. To take care of the rest of the would-be kidnappers.
I'm
sure he'll be back later. Will I be able to see him? She didn't know why she felt so attached to this man she had just met. The beautiful woman laughed lightly. Of course you will. I know Gideon's job keeps him busy, but he has to come home at some point. Dahlia's jaw dropped. Gideon lives here? She suddenly wondered what this gorgeous red-haired woman was doing in this mysterious man's penthouse apartment. And you're his. The woman blushed. I'm so sorry, I'm Brona. I work with Gideon. She held out her hand. Dahlia. Brona's hand lingered a moment before she smiled and pulled it away. What an appropriate name. Dahlia didn't like the way this woman was looking at her. She felt as if Brona knew all her secrets. So what is this place? Changing the subject seemed to be her best course of action. The complex. Brona chewed at her bottom lip. It's made up of offices, training rooms and apartments for the employees and their families. What does everyone do? Brona twirled her red hair between her fingers. Oh, all sorts of things. They have special skills that allow them to do any job Gideon gives them. The redhead seemed extremely uncomfortable now. It only fueled Dahlia's curiosity. What kinds of special skills? Brona laughed nervously. Forget I said that. Sorry, Lori is usually the best person for a meet and greet, but Romani can't transport her here right now. Dahlia stared at the woman. She did not like being lied to. Calmly she asked. Again. What kinds of special skills? Brona held her gaze. You should really just forget I said that. She reached her arm toward Dahlia's face, but Dahlia grabbed her wrist before she could make contact. Dahlia's magic was swirling within her, alerting her to something nearby, a presence, a magical presence. Her eyes burned into the woman. Are you trying to use magic on me? Brona's face paled. What? Dahlia stood up. Were you trying to wipe my memory? Please, Dahlia. I'm only trying to protect you. Dahlia put some distance between the two of them. She needed space to think. But Gideon and the rest of them, they don't have magic. I would have felt it. Blankly she asked the mysterious woman. What are they? What are their special skills? Brona stared at her, pale-faced. Dahlia's eyes went wide as something dawned on her. She turned back to the ornate wolf statue she had noticed earlier and gasped. They're shifters. Her captors had told her about Leakin shifters. They had despised them. When Dahlia had pressed for more information on why they hated the creatures, she had been shut down. It all started to make sense when she thought back to Aria's party. Every person there had been attractive, fit, and unusual in a way she couldn't quite put her finger on. The way Gideon's eyes had glowed when she was giving Arya a lap dance should have been a dead giveaway. Brona swallowed hard. I really think we should wait until Lori gets here. Are they shifters? Oh dear. A new voice entered the room. Dahlia turned to find a beautiful blonde woman entering the suite. She was trailed by the fierce-looking woman with long black hair and tan skin. Dahlia felt instantly on guard. The blonde woman approached her and a feeling of relaxation and peace drifted over her. The tension in her body faded and a feeling of safety and warmth replaced it. Dahlia sighed and looked up at the blonde. Magic, she said irritably. She flicked her gaze back to Brona. Magic again. How many of you are there? Chosen, the blonde woman politely corrected. We refer to the natural witches in this area as chosen. That was a word Dahlia had heard before. My name is Lori, and I believe you already met Leah. The tan woman's dark eyes stared untrusting at Dahlia. Leah gave off no trace of magic, but she was definitely not human. Shifters. Her heart thumped. Your lichens. The dark-eyed woman remained stoically quiet. It was Lori who responded. How do you know about shifters? Dahlia wasn't ready to talk to these new acquaintances about her time in captivity, about anything that had happened in those awful days. Gideon is a shifter too? Dahlia mused. And Arya? Leah took a step closer. This is sensitive information. We have worked hard to keep our true nature to ourselves. Outsiders cannot be allowed to leave with such knowledge. Feeling the weight of her words, Dahlia swallowed. Nerves began to eat away at her even with the help of Lori's soothing presence. The blonde woman placed a calming hand on Dahlia's shoulder. I'm afraid you'll have to remain with us until we can decide the best way to ensure the safety of our pack and you. We still don't know why those men tried to kidnap you. When they took Gideon, our pack became involved as well. Dahlia fought to shake off Lori's comforting influence. I don't need your help. I can take care of myself. Why do they want you? Leah's tone seemed to demand compliance. Dahlia swallowed dryly. Is it really possible they found me? Leah's gaze remained fixed on Dahlia as she asked again. Why do they want you? A numbness had spread throughout her. Dahlia had known he would find her eventually. Is it because of your magic? Asked Brona. Leah's gaze snapped to the redhead. What magic? Dahlia's head ached and she rubbed her temples in an attempt to quell the growing migraine. Lori looked worriedly at her. I think that's enough questions for tonight. Dahlia needs to sleep. I'm sure the drugs from earlier are still working their way out of her system. Leah said nothing as Lori led Dahlia to one of the bedrooms. I know this has been a stressful and confusing day. Try to get some rest. Gideon's penthouse is the absolute safest place you could be. Wards protect the building, and we will have guards outside the door to keep watch. A yawn wrenched its way from Dahlia's mouth and she relented to Lori's.
Comforting aura.
Here's my number. Let me know if you need anything. I live just a few floors down. Call me day or night. Lori wrote an apartment and phone number on a small notepad and passed it to Dahlia. Dahlia nodded. A surge of exhaustion took hold of her. She needed time to think, but thinking would have to wait. Crawling into the oversized bed, she let sleep take her under. Chapter 5. Gideon's wolf paced within him. It was unsettled, and despite its bloodlust earlier that evening, still wanted revenge. The rift between his wolf and human form made him feel edgy and irritable. The alpha now sat in a conference room, surrounded by his most important pack members. A roar tore from his chest as Dr. Sawyer plunged something sharp deep into his shoulder. The doctor clucked his tongue. I told you we could have done this in an actual medical facility with real pain meds. This meeting was the first priority. Gideon gritted his teeth as he felt something digging around inside of his wound. The doctor finally pulled his tools free from the bloody opening. He backed up the remnants of the bullet that had been lodged in Gideon's flesh. I suppose removing this bullet from your arm was going to be a second priority. The doctor raised a questioning eyebrow at him. Gideon just groaned his thanks. With the bullet removed, his skin was beginning to heal properly. He felt almost instant relief. I would have made it a priority eventually. The doctor chuckled softly. You're as stubborn as your father. Dr. Sawyer had been around for many years. As a Leakin himself, he knew how to reason with the headstrong pack members and their unruly wolves. Gideon rotated his shoulder, testing for pain. Thank you, doctor. He clapped the older man on the shoulder. My pleasure, Alpha. Lucas approached Gideon tentatively. Gideon's wolf continued its irritated pacing within him. The animal was putting the others on edge. The scene had already been cleared, Alpha. The tall blonde Aussie and his team had gone back to take care of the kidnappers' bodies. Gideon rubbed his temples as Lucas continued. Whoever it was, they did an excellent job for humans, that is. Why do you say that? Asked Gideon. The others were beginning to take their places around the table. Leah had returned with Lori and Brona in tow. The pack's beta Lance drew Lori into a quick, passionate embrace before taking his seat. We went back for the bodies as you requested. The kidnappers were gone along with the vehicles you mentioned. The reason I believe it was humans is that we were still able to find some of the scattered remains and body parts. Whoever cleaned up was able to recover most of it, but with our Leakin senses we were able to locate several pieces they missed. If they had a Leakin on their team, they would have sniffed out those pieces themselves. Gideon nodded. The group was clearly unfamiliar with our kind. He remembered their horrified expressions. The memory made his wolf lick its lips. Gideon's wolf was strong and it needed to frequently blow off steam. Unfortunately, his busy schedule did not lend itself to much time in his other form. He couldn't remember the last time he let his wolf free to run the woods and mountains behind the complex. It also explains why they dosed you incorrectly, Leah said. Her dark eyes gleamed with anger. Lance turned to face Gideon. You believe they were only after the girl? Correct. Dahlia. She hadn't left his thoughts since the moment they met. Yes. They were taking her to someone. His stomach churned at the idea of someone taking her away from him. Where's Matlina? I want to discuss the security here. Lance checked his watch. She was summoned earlier. I'm sure she'll arrive any moment. As if on cue, the beautiful elderly woman strode confidently through the doors. Even though she was not a Leakin, she and Brona had been continuously loyal in aiding the pack any time magic was needed. Good evening, Matlina. Thank you for coming. Good evening, Alpha. You are looking tired. She placed a weathered hand to his cheek. You need sleep. Gideon chortled. This little old woman seemed to have no problem giving her opinion whether to her grandchildren or the Alpha of a Leakin pack. I will head to bed as soon as this meeting is over, he said. I wanted to make sure everything is good with the wards. The wards were an invisible, magical barrier set up by Matlina to help prevent anyone unwelcome from entering the complex. The older woman smiled. The wards have required more care as of late. Seems someone is always trying to break through my sigils. I have been altering them regularly. Gideon frowned. Has anyone been able to get in? Don't you worry about the wards, Alpha. You take care of your pack and I will handle the magic. As the meeting continued, Gideon began to feel as if he were a million miles away. Dahlia consumed his thoughts. He willed the meeting to end quickly so that he could find out how she was doing. A clearing of a throat brought Gideon's attention back to the group. All eyes were in his direction though. He had no clue what had just been spoken. Thankfully his beta stepped in. I'm sure our Alpha is in need of a good night's sleep to clear his head. We'll be meeting with each of you individually to discuss your particular assignments. That will be all. Lance clasped a hand on Gideon's good shoulder. Get some rest. I'll handle everything and call you if needed. Gideon nodded gratefully. He caught sight of brilliant red hair as the group began to disperse. Brona. The booming sound of his voice made several of the remaining pack members jump. He took a deep breath to center himself as the red-headed chosen approached. He didn't wait for her to speak. How is she? Brona looked tired and nervous. Gideon didn't know if it was because she could sense his wolf's presence or something else. She's sleeping, but she'll have a lot of questions when she wakes up. Gideon nodded. Lucas. The blonde Aussie crossed the space quickly. We need someone to keep an eye on her. I'm sure a team has already been assigned to her detail. Lucas and Brona exchanged glances. We've stationed guards outside the doors. And Matlina says the wards are still active. Gideon blinked. She's here. She's here. Lucas nodded. In the penthouse. Gideon directed his steely gaze at Brona. You took her to my apartment? She rubbed her hands together. Yes, of course. She's your... Brona sucked in a breath. You told us to take her somewhere safe. Your penthouse is the safest place around, and if they truly don't know who you are, it's the last place they would look for her. Gideon couldn't argue with her logic. He thought of Dahlia asleep in his apartment, maybe even asleep in his bed. Something stirred within him and his wolf howled approvingly. Thank you, Brona. I don't know how you and Romani found us, but I am grateful. Brona gave him a tight smile. He was heading toward the exit when she called out to him. Alpha. He turned back around. Brona chewed her lip as she seemed to debate how much to tell him. She knows about lichens. She knows about the pack. She knows about you. Don't know how she wouldn't tell us. She's different. Gideon swallowed hard. Yes, she is. With that he left. Dahlia sat on the edge of the bed, shaking and covered in sweat after another nightmare. Even though she escaped, she felt as if her captors still had their claws in her. Time away had made her realize just what a fool she had been. They had manipulated her, used her, and taken advantage of her trust and naivete. When her powers first revealed themselves, her parents had been mortified. Coming from a strict religious background, they saw her as some sort of devil. They were afraid of her. The memory still sent pain splintering through her heart. They had turned to the church to fix her. She'd been dunked in holy water, chanted over, and forced to pray on her knees until they were raw and bruised. When she finally refused to be demonized any longer, her parents turned their backs on her. It hurt to be cut off from the only family she had ever known. Despite their judgment, she refused to believe she was branded by the devil just because she could grow ivy and help flowers bloom. Of course, there was a darker side to her gifts. When he found her, she'd been lost and alone. He had seen her abilities in her darkest moment and had welcomed her. She eventually saw through him. That bastard only wanted to use her. Remembering that circle of sigils and smoky dark cave sent a chill up her spine. She climbed out of Gideon's guest bed and padded sleepily into the bathroom. The shower was always her first attempt to wash off the nightmare that clung to her. Standing under the hot water calmed her mind and soothed the aches of sadness and regret. Her dirty black catsuit looked less than appealing after the events of the evening. She perused the spare closet, finding it filled with suits and dress shirts. She slid her hands across the formal fabrics, feeling the softness and luxury of each rich item. She settled on a crisp white button-up and slipped it on. The shirt swallowed her frame. She had no doubt the massive clothing belonged to Gideon. Despite the clothes being clean, she swore she could smell his earthy, masculine scent beneath the fabric softener. He smelled just like the woods. A hand absent-mindedly brushed along her inner thighs when she thought about those deep blue eyes. Racy thoughts enveloped her now fully awake mind. Though it was the middle of the night, it was clear sleep would not return. Moving quietly from the bedroom, she slipped into the kitchen. A cold glass of water was exactly what she needed to extinguish these unnecessary and overly steamy thoughts about the mysterious. Chapter 7. Dahlia sipped tea as she admired the views from one of the large penthouse windows. The forest, the mountains, everything looked more beautiful from up here. The bed had been empty when she woke up, but a note on the pillow told her Gideon had a quick morning meeting and would be back shortly. Wandering back into the oversized kitchen, she poured herself another steaming cup from the kettle. The soft, delicious aching between her thighs became a reminder of last night. She bit her lip thinking of all the things Gideon had done to her. He had that talented mouth, those fingers, and God, that dick. He had woken her up several times in the night, and had given her pleasure again and again until exhaustion finally took them both. Good morning. Dahlia jumped, turning to face him and cursing as she spilled tea. She was so busy fantasizing that she hadn't even noticed his arrival. A navy suit clung tightly to his frame and she bit back a groan. The memories flooded back even more strongly now that he was here. He growled softly and she knew he'd caught her scent. He moved closer. You're wet and you smell so fucking good. The deep, silky voice vibrated close to her ear. His voice alone was enough to take her from wet to soaking. He pressed against her, pinning her frame to the counter. He leaned down to take her mouth in his when Dahlia's stomach growled so loudly it could have given his wolf a run for its money. Gideon raised an eyebrow. Hungry. Her stomach rumbled again in response. Starving. Her voice was breathy and a little embarrassed. Gideon let out a soft laugh as he pulled his hips away from her. Come on. Know the perfect place. Dahlia admired his flawless form as he moved around the kitchen. Her eyes devoured every inch of him, and there were quite a few inches to be devoured. A wicked grin crossed over Gideon's handsome features. Or we can order in. He leaned in for another kiss but was abruptly stopped by the loudest stomach growl yet. Dahlia laughed. I don't trust you this close to your bed. If I want food, I think we are going to have to leave the apartment. Gideon shrugged. Wise choice. The coupe it is. Dahlia had discovered a variety of sundresses and strappy sandals waiting outside the entrance to the penthouse. A note revealed that the items were from Lori. Dahlia was more than grateful to not have to put her outfit on from the night before or do the walk of shame to breakfast in another of Gideon's oversized dress shirts. After a quick shower and the fresh clothes, they were ready to head out to the Coop. The Coop was an adorable 24-hour diner just down the street from the complex. Everyone seemed to have something to say to Gideon as they made their way toward breakfast. To Dahlia's surprise, Gideon took her hand, seemingly unaware of the curious and surprised looks of everyone they passed. The feeling of his large, warm hand in hers filled her stomach with butterflies. In actuality, several orange and black butterflies hovered around them as they walked. The small, fluttering creatures had always been drawn to her. She assumed they sensed her power to grow things. Watching them fly around made her envious of their freedom. If she had wings, she would travel the world, venturing to the greatest gardens and rainforests on the planet. A beautiful young hostess with tan skin and strawberry blonde hair greeted them at the diner's entrance. Her name tag read Ginger. She had an unusual, an exotic look. One green eye and one gold eye stared first at Dahlia and then opened wide at the sight of Gideon. Well, isn't this a treat? Gideon Ulrich in the flesh finally found time in your busy schedule to visit your favorite breakfast spot. Good morning, Gigi. Is your dad working today? Please, he hasn't taken a day off since he opened this place. She rolled her multicolored eyes. Gideon swept his arm around Dahlia as he laughed. That sounds like Earl. Ginger led them to a booth near the back. The Coop had that vintage silver diner look and a cozy comfort food feel. She had no doubt every item on the menu would be at least 50% butter. She sighed. She and her parents used to eat at a little country breakfast spot every Sunday after church. Dahlia's heart ached as she thought about how long it had been since she saw her family. Everything okay? Gideon asked, his face full of concern.
Fine.
Just hungry, Dahlia answered quickly. What's good here? Everything, Gideon said without hesitation. Well, that really narrows it down. Thanks for the help. He beamed another dazzling smile in her direction. She had met him in the dim club and seen him again in the dark kitchen late at night. Here in broad daylight he was even more magnificent than she remembered. What a weird turn of events the last 24 hours had been. My name's Clove. What can I get ya? The waitress's voice startled Dahlia out of her thoughts. She smiled up at her. I'll have the French. Dahlia stopped mid-sentence, as she found herself staring once again into one green and one gold eye. This pair was accompanied by long jet black hair with two thick blue stripes in the front. The hair was different, but the face was identical to the hostess that had seated them. We're twins. The waitress spoke with a tight smile that said she spent far too much time explaining this to people. Twins. Of course that made sense. One had simply dyed her hair. What can I get you? The French toast with scrambled eggs and hash browns, please. And a hot tea if you have it. You got it. And for you. Her blue hair swished across her face as she turned toward Gideon. One of everything, a male voice shouted from the back. An older gentleman emerged from the kitchen and made his way to their table. Gideon let out a booming laugh. Something like that. My favorite Alpha made time to visit old Earl and his little country diner. Alpha? That was news to Dahlia. The older gray-haired gentleman had a thick mustache and wild grin. Clove and Gideon each shot quick looks toward Dahlia. Dad, watch your mouth. She's human. Clove spoke in a whisper so quiet Dahlia barely heard it. Earl leaned toward Dahlia. His caramel gaze stared deep into her. I don't know what she is, but that girl's not human. I could smell that magic from all the way in the back. Earthy, smoky like a summer bonfire. I remember a similar scent when I first met your mother and learned about her gifts.
Eve.
Got the best nose in Mountain's End. He took one of Dahlia's hands in his. My dear, whoever you are, whatever you are welcome here. Dahlia blushed. She couldn't seem to find her voice. It's good to see you, Earl. Gideon clapped a hand on the large man's shoulder. You too, my boy. I'll have the most delicious breakfast to ever grace your palates out in a moment. He gave a dramatic flourish and a bow before heading away. Clove gave Dahlia one more appraising look before she took their menus and disappeared into the back. Gideon cleared his throat. We didn't exactly get a chance to talk about things last night. I know we both have our secrets. Mountain's End is home to All sorts of unique individuals. I don't know what you've gotten yourself mixed up in, but you'll be safe in the complex. I'm here if you want to talk about it. Dahlia gazed into Gideon's sapphire eyes. She could lose herself in those eyes. She thought about how brightly they glowed sometimes. Leakin. She didn't want him to know what she was. The conflicted ache ate away at her. Felt like if anyone could understand her unusual gifts, it would be a man who could transform into a fully grown wolf. Still, she felt hesitant. He knew a little bit about her magic. She had revealed herself unintentionally during the events of last night. The vines were only trying to keep her safe. Honestly, I don't want to talk about it. Gideon took a long silent moment to study her. She felt the need to look away. Under his silent observations, I understand, but until we know exactly why things went down the way they did last night, I think you should stay here. Dahlia's heart picked up speed. Stay here. Gideon nodded. We can find a more permanent place for you within the complex. She gave him a nervous laugh. That's very kind, but I have an apartment that will do just fine. Plus I have a job. I can't just quit going to work while your people investigate. Gideon's energy shifted as he sat up straight. Until we know what happened, your apartment and job are not an option. Anger and panic rose in her chest like a snake. What happens if I say no and just leave? Gideon looked discomfited. I was really hoping you would understand why I wanted you to stay and agree. You and I were both put in danger last night. Means your life and the lives of my pack members may be at risk. Until we find out why they took you and me, you need to stay here. I'm just trying to protect you. He seemed sincere, but a dangerous edge lay hidden between each sentence. His words reminded her of her time underground with him. She had walked into that situation, not realizing she was a foolish and willing captive. Her heart pounded hard as flashbacks sent her into a fit of anxiety. She would not be caged again. A panic urged her limbs to flee. She cleared her throat. Where are the bathrooms? Worry crept over his features. Up near the entrance. Do you want me to show you? No, that's fine. I'll just be a minute. The decision had been made. She moved quickly toward the front. There were a few steps remaining. Few steps. To change her mind. Turn left for the restroom. Turn right for the exit. Dahlia turned right. The second she reached the open air, she ran. The sun shone brightly down on her. The weather had been steadily warming and her skin soaked up the beauty. The muscles in her legs flexed as she moved faster. She jogged until she recognized the familiar sticker on a rideshare car. A quick conversation later, and she was in the back seat. She had promised herself she would never be anyone's captive again. That she would have control over her life from now on. She glanced out the window. Some part of her, if not all of her already, missed his presence. The sea of trees swam past as she returned home, away from captivity, away from Mountain's End, and away from Gideon.